For years, it was just quiet, the kind of quiet that's heavy, it weighs on you. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a misunderstanding that just never got cleared up. It was a deliberate act, a campaign of silence. I was the black sheep. But not for any dramatic reason. I didn't get into trouble with the law, I didn't have some scandal. My crime was that I chose a different path. I went to art school instead of business school. I moved to a small city hundreds of miles away to teach, to live a quieter life, a life that felt authentic to me, not the life they had mapped out. That was my transgression to them. It was a personal insult, a rejection of everything they stood for. And then the pivot, it was so swift, so surgical. So listen, he said, his tone shifting into business mode. The reason I am calling is about Grandma's house. But I respected your wish. I closed the browser window. I deleted the email address I'd created for the search. I focused on my life, on my parents, on the people who actually wanted me. I tried to put it all in a box and lock it away. I thought that was the end of it. The chapter was closed, just like you said. Then out of nowhere, a year later, a new message popped up. It wasn't from you, it was from an aunt, a sister of yours, someone I hadn't even tried to contact. Her message was friendly but strange. She said she'd heard about me from you, and that she was so sorry for how things had been handled. She said she'd love to get to know me. We talked for a few weeks, superficial stuff. And I started to feel that little flicker of hope again. Maybe this was a back door opening, maybe your sister was going to be the bridge. But then the tone shifted. She started asking about my health. Was I well? Did I ever get sick? Did I have any major health issues? It seemed odd. But I answered vaguely. Then she told me her message was long, and it felt rehearsed. She said my biological brother, your son, was very sick, kidney failure, he was on dialysis. And it was bad, he was on the transplant list. But the wait was long, and his chances weren't great. And then she said that since I was a direct blood relative, would be a perfect match. She said the family was hoping, praying really, that I would be willing to get tested to see if I could save his life. I remember reading that message and my blood ran cold. It wasn't about getting to know me. It wasn't about welcoming a lost relative. The timing was too perfect. The friendly aunt act was just the lead up. They'd ignored me for a year. And now, they needed something. They needed a part of me, not my love, not my presence, not a relationship. They needed my kidney. The anger that came over me was like a physical heat. It was white hot and all-consuming. The audacity, the sheer unbelievable audacity. You discarded me. You told me I was a disruption to your perfect family. And now when your precious son, the one you kept, is in trouble, you have your sister send a message to see if my organs are available. You didn't even have the decency to ask me yourself. You sent a messenger because you were too much of a coward to face me. I didn't respond to the aunt right away. I needed to think. And that's when the real conflict started. The philosophical torture. Does sharing DNA mean I owe you something? Is there some biological debt that comes from being related? I lay awake at night arguing with myself. One voice said, he's your brother, you could save a life. How could you live with yourself if you don't even try? But the other voice, the louder one, said, he is a stranger. His parents, your biological parents, made it clear you are not family. Family doesn't treat each other like this. Family doesn't only show up when they need a spare part. I thought about the risk to me. Surgery is surgery. Donating an organ is a massive physical undertaking. What if something went wrong? What would my real family, my parents, do? Without me, would your family even care? Or would I just be the donor who didn't make it, a sad footnote in their story? The emotional risk was even greater if I did this. What then? Would I be invited to Christmas? Would I suddenly be welcomed? Or would I be the convenient relative, the walking organ bank you could call upon again, if someone else got sick? The whole idea made me feel used, like a commodity. I wasn't being wanted for who I was, but for what I could provide. Grandma's house, the old Victorian by the lake, the place where we spent our summers, the place she always said would stay in the family. I decided I had to confront you. I couldn't let this happen through an intermediary. I found your personal profile, and I sent you a message. I didn't hold back. I reminded you of your words, your closed chapter. I asked you how you could possibly have the nerve to ask me for such an enormous thing. After you rejected me so completely, I told you I knew about your son, and that I knew the aunt's message came from you. Your reply was a masterpiece of manipulation. You didn't apologize for the past, you glossed over it. You said this was a separate matter, a medical crisis. You said you were desperate, that a mother will do anything for her child. And that word mother felt like a slap. You were a mother to him. But what were you to me? You appealed to my humanity, to my compassion. completely bypassing any responsibility for the relationship you destroyed before it even began. You said you understood if I was angry, but that this was about life and death. You were trying to make me feel like a monster for even hesitating. Through all of this, my real family was my anchor. I told my mom and dad everything. They were furious for me. They saw right through it. They held me while I cried from the sheer stress of it all. My dad said you don't owe them a single thing, not your time, not your energy, and certainly not a part of your body. My mom said, we are your family, we chose you, and we will love and protect you no matter what you decide. Their support was unconditional. It was the polar opposite of the transactional conditional love you were offering. It clarified everything. I made my decision. It wasn't made out of spite, it was made out of self-preservation and a deep respect for the family that actually valued me. I wrote a final message, this time to both you and the aunt. I said I would not be getting tested. I said the request coming after a lifetime of absence and a specific rejection was inappropriate and had caused me significant distress. I said that my health and my well-being and the peace of my family were my priorities. I told you that I had a family, a support system, and that I would not jeopardize that for people who saw me as a means to an end. I told you not to contact me again, that this was the final communication. I said that, while I wished your son no ill will, I could not, and would not be involved then. I blocked you. I blocked the aunt. I blocked every profile I could find connected to you. It was the most powerful thing I've ever done. It was me finally completely choosing myself. I was saying no to the idea that biology is destiny. I was affirming that family is about choice, about commitment, about showing up day after day. In the silence that followed, I didn't feel guilt. I felt a profound sense of peace. The weight of your expectation, the pressure of your crisis, was gone. I looked at my parents, at the life we'd built together, and I knew without a shadow of a doubt what family truly is. It isn't a shared set of genes, it's a shared history. It's the people who are there for you, not when they need something, but when you need everything. You needed a kidney, I needed a mother, and I already had one, the best one. I had my family all along. You just helped me see how truly valuable they are. Mom is the executor of the will, he continued, and it turns out Grandma never updated it. After you moved away, your name is still on the deed. It's a joint tenancy thing to sell the place, and we've got a fantastic offer, by the way. A developer wants the whole lot. We need all the signatures. We need yours. You know, in our house, ambition was a dirty word. It meant you were forgetting where you came from. My dreams were too big for the walls of our apartment, and they started to scare people. I was accepted to a university overseas. It wasn't just a good school, it was a key to a different world. I remember holding the acceptance letter, my hands shaking, not with joy, but with a cold, sharp fear. I knew what was coming. I told them over dinner. The silence that fell was heavier than any noise. My father put down his fork. He didn't shout, that would have been easier. His voice was quiet like stone. He said, if I was so eager to throw away my family, my culture, my duty, then I should go, but I should not expect to have a family to come back to. My mother just stared at her plate, her silence agreeing with him. The ultimatum was clear: stay and be the good daughter they expected, leave and be nothing to them. I chose to leave. The day I left, no one came to the airport. I walked through the terminal alone, my suitcase feeling heavier with every step. I kept looking back, thinking maybe, just maybe, one of them would show up, a last-minute change of heart. But the only face I saw was my reflection in the glass, pale and terrified. The silence that followed wasn't just an absence of sound. It was an active thing. It was the sound of a door slamming shut, locked from the other side. For years there was nothing, no phone calls on my birthday, no messages. During the holidays, I was a ghost to them. First year alone was a kind of cold I had never felt before. It wasn't just the weather, though that was part of it. It was the isolation. I had to learn everything from scratch: how to open a bank account, how to pay taxes in a new system, how to navigate a city where I didn't know a soul. I worked 2 jobs on top of my studies, surviving on cheap noodles and free coffee from the campus library. I'd come back to my tiny room, a converted closet really, and the loneliness was a physical weight on my chest. But slowly something shifted. I started to make friends, other students, immigrants like me, who understood what it meant to build a life from nothing. We became a new kind of family, one bound by shared struggle, not just by blood. I graduated, I found a good job, I moved from that closet of a room to a real apartment with windows that actually let in the sun. I built a life, a stable, quiet, good life. But the estrangement was always there, a low hum in the background of everything I did. Constant unanswered question. Then the phone rang. It was a number I hadn't seen in years, my mother's number. My heart started pounding a frantic drum against my ribs. I answered. And her voice was normal, as if no time had passed, as if she hadn't let years go by without a single word. She asked about the weather. She asked if I was eating well. The small talk was so forced, so painfully transparent. And then the real reason for the call emerged. My cousin, her sister's son, wanted to come to this country, to study, to have a better chance. They needed a sponsor, someone with legal status here with a stable job, to sign the papers to vouch for him financially. That someone had to be me. There was no "we're sorry, no. We miss you," no acknowledgement of the chasm between us. It was a transaction. She presented it as a simple fact, an expectation. Of course I would do this. It was my duty, the same duty I was accused of abandoning when I left was now being. The air went out of the room. It wasn't a health scare. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was a signature, a technicality. I was a hurdle in a real estate transaction. The shocking part wasn't the request itself. It was the revelation that through all the shunning, through all the deliberate exclusion, I had still existed in this one concrete way in the eyes of the law. I was still part of the family. They hadn't just cut me out emotionally. They had failed to cut me out legally. And now they needed my compliance to finalize. Invoked to serve them. I listened to her, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. All the pain, the loneliness, the years of silence, it all crystallized into this one moment. They had disowned me for seeking the very opportunity they now wanted me to hand to someone else. The life I built alone through sheer will was now just a resource for them to use. The cultural obligations they said I had betrayed were only valid when they benefited from them. The hypocrisy was so vast, so breathtaking. It was almost fun. I let her finish. I let the silence hang on the line for a moment. And then I said no. My voice was quieter than I expected. But it was steady. I told her. I remembered the terms of our relationship very clearly. I was told I was no longer their child. When I left, I built this life without their help, without their support. And frankly, in spite of their rejection. I told her I would not risk my hard-won stability, my credit, my peace of mind for a family that ceased to consider me part of it. The moment I dared to want something more. She was stunned. She started to protest, her voice rising, slipping back into the old patterns of guilt. But family is family. How can you be so selfish after all we've done for you? I listened to it. And it sounded like a recording, a script I had heard my whole life. And for the first time, it had no power over me. The cord was cut. I told her the decision was final. I wished my cousin well, but I would not be signing anything. I hung up the phone. The room was silent. But it was a different silence from the one I had known for so long. That old silence was heavy with absence. This new silence was light. It was full of space. I felt a surge of something clean and sharp. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was a final, definitive understanding. I was not the person they thought I was. I was not an extension of them. I was my own person. I looked around my apartment at the books on the shelves, the pictures of my friends on the walls, the life I had built with my own two hands. This was mine, entirely mine. The conditional love, the bonds that were only bonds when it was convenient for them. That was a weight I had been carrying for years without realizing it. And in that moment, I put it down. I embraced the identity I had been forced into. But now on my own terms, I am a self-made individual. My family is the one I have chosen, the one that supports me without trying to control me, and I am free. You know, in every family, there's a role: the golden child, the peacemaker. The problem, I was the scapegoat. From as far back as I can remember, it was just the part I played. If a dish was left in the sink, it was mine. Even if I hadn't eaten at home that day. If money went missing from my mother's purse. The questions always came to me first, the look in their eyes. It wasn't even anger most of the time. It was this weary confirmation, a sort of "there she goes again, disappointing us just like we knew she would." Their prophet. My brother, he could do no wrong. He got a B on a test. Oh, the teacher was unfair. He was working so hard. I got a B. It was because I was lazy, unfocused, a constant underachiever. The standards were just different for them. It was a fact of life for me. It was a set of impossible rules I could never quite follow. I learned to walk on eggshells. Before I even knew what the phrase meant, the air in our house was thick with this unspoken accusation. I was the reason for the tension. I was the source of the stress. The final straw was so stupid, so small. It was a holiday dinner. My aunt had brought a ceramic pie dish, one of those family heirlooms, after dessert. It was sitting on the counter, someone bumped into it. And it shattered on the floor, the room went silent. And then all at once, every single head turned to me. I was standing clear across the room, holding a stack of plates. But it didn't matter, my father just sighed this heavy performative sigh of disappointment. Can't you ever be careful, he said, not did you. Do it, just can't you ever be careful, that was it. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just being blamed for a broken dish. I was being blamed for the very atmosphere of disappointment I seemed to create just by breathing. After that, the ostracism became official. I was invited to fewer things, conversations would stop. When I walked into a room, my phone calls went unanswered. It was a quiet excommunication. And the worst part was I started to believe it. I spent years in therapy, literally paying someone to help me undo the damage, to convince me that I wasn't inherently flawed, that the world wouldn't end if I took up space. It was a long, hard climb out of that pit of shame they'd dug for me. Then about 6 months ago a letter came. It was from a bank. I'd never heard of thick formal paper. I almost threw it away thinking it was some kind of promotional junk mail. But something made me open it. It was about an account, a savings account established decades ago by my grandfather. It was a family account, meant for a specific purpose, like helping with a down payment on a house or funding education. And according to the documents, my name was on it, not just on it, but as a primary account holder. My signature was required for any major withdrawal. My parents' names were there too, but mine was listed right alongside theirs. I read it 3 times. My grandfather, he was a quiet man, kind of stern, but he had a soft spot for me, I remember. He'd tell me I was the strong one, the one who saw things clearly. I thought he was just being a sweet old man. But he'd done this, he'd put my name on this asset, this little nest egg the family had. And no one had ever known. The account had just been sitting there gathering a little interest, forgotten by everyone except the bank. And now my parents wanted to use it. My brother had found a house he wanted to buy, and this money was the perfect down payment, but the bank needed my signature. The phone calls started within a day. First it was my mother. Her voice was sickly sweet, the kind of tone she used when she wanted something. Honey, we got this letter from the bank. There must be some silly mistake. You just need to pop down there and sign this form so we can get this sorted for your brother. I told her I'd look into it. The sweetness evaporated. What is there to look into? It's a simple signature. I said I needed to see the documents for myself. She hung up on me. I was too stunned to be angry at first. It was just a cold, clear shock. You need my signature, I repeated just to hear the words aloud. Then came my father, the bully. The tactic changed. It was all bluster and intimidation. This is family money. Your grandfather would be rolling in his grave to see you causing trouble like this. Just do the right thing for once, for once. Those 2 words hung in the air. They contained my entire childhood. All the blame, all the condemnation. I felt that old familiar pull, the urge to cave, to make it easier to be the compliant problem they needed me to be. But something was different this time. I had the paper in my hand. I had the proof. I wasn't operating on their turf anymore. They arranged a meeting, of course. They did, at their house. I walked in, and it was like stepping onto a stage where everyone knew their lines except me. But I did know my lines. I just had new ones. My brother was there looking entitled and annoyed. My mother was wringing her hands. My father stood by the fireplace, playing the patriarch. He started, let's not drag this out. We need you to sign the papers. The bank sent them over. It's a formality. He slid a folder across the coffee table. I didn't touch it. I looked at each of them. I saw the panic behind the anger. Their whole system was threatened. The problem wasn't behaving like a problem. I took a breath. My voice was calm, which surprised even me. I've read the documents. I said, grandfather put my name on this account for a reason. He trusted me with this. My mother scoffed, don't be dramatic. He was an old man. He probably didn't know what he was doing. I think he knew exactly what he was doing, I said, and I am not going to sign anything until we talk about why this is so difficult for you, until we talk about the broken pie dish, and the missing money, and the way you've all treated me my entire life as if I was a mistake. The room went still. My brother rolled his eyes. Here we go, playing the victim. I'm not playing the victim, I said, my eyes still on my parents. I am stating a fact. You made me the scapegoat for everything that was wrong with this family. Every argument you two had, every disappointment you felt. It was easier to dump it on me than to face it yourselves. And I am done carrying that for you. My father's face was red. This is not about ancient history. This is about your brother's future. Exactly, he said, his voice brimming with a fake cheerfulness. It'll be great, the split is equal, your share will be substantial. It's a win-win, we can all finally put this silly feud behind us. A silly feud. He reduced 5 years of painful exile to a silly feud, and the money was the band-aid he was offering to fix it. No, I said, and my voice got even quieter, which made them lean in to hear this is about my past. And my present, you need something from me. For the first time, you actually need something from the person you've treated like a liability, and I want to know what you're going to do about that. My mother started to cry, not real tears, but the manipulative, guilt-tripping tears. I knew so well how. Can you be so cruel after all we've done for you? We raised you. You raised me to believe I was worthless. I said the words were simple, and they were true, and I don't believe that anymore, so here's what's going to happen. I am not signing these papers today. I am going to take them, I am going to have my lawyer look at them, and I am going to decide what I think is fair. The structure crumbled right in front of me. My father was sputtering, powerless, my mother's crying turned real. But it was a cry of frustration, not sadness. My brother stood up. This is ridiculous. You're going to ruin this for me. I looked at him, the golden child, the one who never had to fight for anything. I am not ruining anything, I said. I am just no longer fixing it for you. I picked up the folder from the table, I turned, and I walked out of the house. No one followed me, they were frozen in their roles. But the main character had just walked off the stage. In the end, I did sign the papers, but I did it on my terms. I had my lawyer draw up an agreement. The money could be used for the down payment. But my brother's house would be held as a shared asset, with my name on the title proportionate to the amount from the account. It was fair, it was legally sound. And it meant they had to acknowledge me in a legal document. As an equal, they had to see my name next to theirs, not as a problem, but as a partner. The apology never came, not a real one. There were a few mumbled words, a strained Christmas dinner, where the tension was so thick you could taste it. But it didn't matter, the shift wasn't in them, it was in me. For the first time I saw myself not as the family problem, but as a person with agency. I held the power not just because of a bank account, but because I had refused to play the game. I finally understood that their treatment of me was never about who I was, it was a reflection of their own dysfunction. They needed a scapegoat to hold their pain, their insecurities, their failures. It was a system. And I was just a cog they had assigned. But cogs don't get a choice, people do. I made a choice that day to stop being the thing they blamed, and start being the person I am. And that's a cycle you can break. You just have to be willing to hold the pen, and refuse to sign your own condemnation. The house always had a certain smell when I was growing up. It wasn't a bad smell, just distinct, a mix of my mother's perfume and my father's aftershave, and underneath it all the faint, sweet scent of my brother's success. That's not an exaggeration, it felt like his accomplishments had a physical presence, a fragrance that filled the rooms, his trophies on the mantelpiece, his honor roll certificates framed in the hallway, the sound of his name being spoken with that particular tone of pride. That was the background noise of my childhood, and my own life. Well, my life was the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the other room, present necessary, even, but nobody really pays attention to it until they're hungry. He suggested we all meet to talk it over. He said all of us, meaning me, him, my sister Sarah, and my mother, a family meeting. I knew it for what it was, a coordinated pressure campaign. But some part of me, that hopeful, wounded part, thought maybe this is the only way back, and maybe this is the doorway. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. I remember my 10th birthday. My brother Mark was 14 for my birthday. I got a new bike. It was a nice bike, a red one. I was genuinely happy with it. But 2 weeks later, for no reason other than he made the junior varsity basketball team, my parents bought Mark a car. Not a junker, a proper used car. I can still see it, a sleek blue sedan sitting in the driveway. The bike felt like a consolation prize. After that, it was never about the value of the gifts. Not really, it was about the celebration. My achievements were met with a pat on the head. That's nice, dear. Marks were met with fanfare, with family dinners at expensive restaurants, with his name being announced like he'd just won a Nobel Prize. I learned to play the clarinet. I practiced for hours every day, and I made first chair in the school band. My parents came to the concert, they clapped afterward. My mom said you sounded very nice. The next week Mark got a B+ on a history test, a subject he usually struggled with. My dad took him out for a steak dinner to celebrate the improvement. I sat at home with a frozen pizza, listening to my mom on the phone telling her sister about Mark's incredible turnaround. My first chair was just expected. His beeploos was a triumph. That was the pattern. My consistency was my downfall. Because I was reliable, because I didn't cause trouble, I became invisible. My needs were simple, so they assumed I had everything I needed. Mark's needs were dramatic, so they demanded attention. The decision to leave wasn't one big moment, it was 1,000 small moments piling up, until the weight was too much to carry. I went to a college 2 states away. I built a life there. I got a job in accounting. It was stable, quiet work. I liked the order of it, the logic. I bought a small condo. I had a few good friends. I spoke to my parents on holidays and birthdays. The conversations were always the same. They'd ask how I was. I'd say fine. And then they'd spend 20 minutes telling me about Mark's latest venture, his promotion, his new girlfriend, his investment ideas. I was a footnote in the story of their family. The reliable, boring chapter they skimmed over to get to the exciting parts. Then the calls started to change. The excitement in my mother's voice, when she talked about Mark, became strained. He had left his stable job to start some kind of tech startup with a friend. It was going to be huge. She said it was going to change everything. My dad, always the pragmatist, sounded nervous. He mentioned they'd loaned Mark some money to help get things off the ground. Then it was more money. They remortgaged their house. I found this out not because they told me, but because I overheard my mom talking to my aunt on the phone one evening. When I was visiting for Christmas, the house felt different. The smell of success had been replaced by something else, something sour and anxious. The crash, when it came, was spectacular. Mark's business partner emptied the accounts and disappeared. The company collapsed instantly, leaving behind a mountain of debt. And because my parents had cosigned on the loans, that debt landed squarely on their doorstep. The golden child hadn't just failed, he had set the whole kingdom on fire. On his way down, the phone calls from my parents stopped being about Mark's brilliance and started being about their desperation. Their voices were thin, frayed. They were facing foreclosure. They were going to lose everything. I drove to the city. The following weekend, the meeting was at my mother's house, a place that no longer felt like home. It felt like a museum of a life I'd been evicted from. They were all there, seated around the dining room table, a table I remembered from countless childhood meals. The atmosphere was stiff, formal. The pleasantries were brittle, hollow. "You look well," my mother said, not meeting my eyes. I thought for a naive moment that this might be a turning point, that they might finally see me not as a financial solution, but as their daughter, that they might call and say, "We've made a terrible mistake. We're so sorry for how we treated you." But that's not what happened. The call came on a Tuesday evening. It was my father. His voice was gruff. "All business. No, how are you? No pleasantries," he said. They'd found a way out. There was a loan restructuring program, but it required a cosigner with impeccable credit. Their credit was ruined. Mark's was worse. Mine, he said, he knew was excellent. He said it like it was a fact. He'd just discovered a resource he was entitled to tap. Then my mother got on the phone. Her voice was trembling, but not with apology. It was with a sense of urgency, of demand. "We need you to do this," she said. "It's the only way. You have to help your brother. You have to help us." There was no please. There was no "we know this is a lot to ask." It was an expectation, a transaction. I was the one with the good credit, so I was the one who was needed. It was that simple to them. And then Mark himself came on the line. His voice was different. The usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a wheedling, pathetic tone. "Come on, sis," he said. "You're the responsible one. You always have been. We need you to bail us out. It's what family does." The word family felt like a slap. For 30 years, I hadn't been family. I'd been the audience. Now suddenly, when the script called for a savior, I was promoted to a lead role. The hurt wasn't just raw, it was ancient. It was every forgotten birthday, every minimized achievement. Every time I'd been an afterthought. They weren't asking me to help because I was their daughter. They were asking because I was an asset they had overlooked, and now they needed to use it. I was quiet for a long time. I could hear their anxious breathing on the other end of the line. I thought about my small, quiet condo, my orderly life, the life I built for myself, precisely because the one they offered me was so chaotic and unfair. I thought about signing my name to their debt, tying my hard-won stability to their sinking ship. I thought about the lifetime of messages that would send that it was okay, that I accepted my role, that their favoritism had no consequences. And I knew I couldn't do it. I took a deep breath. My voice was calm, steadier. Then I felt no. I said, "I am not going to sign anything." The silence on the other end was absolute. Then it broke into a wave of protests. My mother started crying, my father started yelling, asking me what kind of person I was. Mark called me selfish. I let them talk, I let the wave crash against me, and when there was a pause I spoke again. Do you remember my graduation? I asked. I graduated magna cum laude. You both came, you took a picture. And then you left early to drive 3 hours to see Mark's club baseball game. He struck out twice, but you were there for him. They had documents spread out on the table, highlighted sections, post-it notes. They'd done their homework for a few minutes. They continued the charade. Sarah asked about my teaching, but her eyes were darting to the papers. It was a performance, and a bad one. I continued. This isn't about this loan. This is about every single time you chose him over me. This is about every time you made me feel like I was less than. You created this situation. You poured every resource you had into him, and you left me to fend for myself. And now you want me to clean up the mess. No, the answer is no. I told them I loved them, and that was the hardest part because I did. But I said I loved myself more. I said I refused to set myself on fire to keep them warm. I said they needed to face the consequences of the family. They built the favorite, they created this. Was their problem to solve, not mine. The things they said then, I won't repeat them. The anger, the guilt, the venom. It was all the proof I needed that I had made the right choice. They didn't see the error of their ways. They just saw that their backup plan had failed. I hung up the phone. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding. But underneath the panic there was a solid, unshakable feeling. It was peace. It was the peace of finally, after a lifetime, setting a boundary and holding it. I was no longer the shadow, I was a person who said no. They did lose the house. They moved into a small apartment. Mark drifted from one job to another. We don't speak anymore, and sometimes on a quiet evening, I feel a pang of sadness for what could have been. But it's not a regret, it's a mourning. I found my validation elsewhere, in my work, in my friends, in the quiet dignity of my own life. My worth was never in their approval. And finally I understood that their favoritism broke our family, but my refusal to enable it was what set me free. My family has a certain way of operating. It's like a machine, and all the parts are very loud. My father's voice is a constant low rumble of opinion and decision. My older sister's is a sharp, high-pitched melody of social plans and immediate reactions. My brother's is a steady, booming bassline of practical advice. And my mother's is the conductor, weaving it all together into a symphony of certainty. They are all very sure, they are all very heard. And then there's me. I am the quiet part, the part of the machine that doesn't make a sound. You wouldn't even know I was there. Unless the machine stopped working. For years I've existed in the spaces between their conversations. I sit at the dinner table, and I watch the volley of words, a story about work, a plan for a vacation, a debate about politics. The ball goes back and forth between my father, my sister, my brother. My mother adds a comment, a question. It's a closed circuit. I learned early on that if I tried to inject a thought, it would be like throwing a feather into a tornado. It would get caught for a second, spun around, and then discarded without anyone even noticing. Oh, that's nice, dear, my mother would say, not looking up from her plate, or my father would just continue his point, talking right over the top of my fading voice. My sister would finish my sentences for me, assuming she knew what I was going to say, and usually getting it wrong. My brother would just pat my shoulder. You're so quiet, he'd say, always observing. He said it like it was a personality trait, like having brown eyes. It wasn't a choice, it was a survival mechanism. Feeling wasn't just one of being ignored, it was a deeper erosion. It was the slow, quiet realization that my thoughts, my feelings, my perspective on our family, it didn't have any weight, it didn't register on their scale. If I was upset about something, it was dismissed as me being too sensitive. If I had an idea, it was unrealistic. Until my brother had the same idea 5 minutes later. And then it was brilliant. I became a ghost in my own home, a pleasant, quiet ghost who helped with the dishes. And excommunication was methodical. At first it was the missed birthday calls. Then it was my mother's Christmas card that arrived 2 weeks late with just her signature, no note. Then the invitations just stopped coming. See, the photos online, all of them together, at my brother's lavish summer barbecues, at my sister's ski lodge for New Year's. Everyone smiling, a perfect, seamless unit. And I was the missing piece that nobody seemed to notice was gone. Or if they did notice, they were glad I tried for a while. Then David took over. He slid a packet toward me. This is the offer, this is what's at stake. The number was indeed large, life-changing for me, for them. It was a bonus, a luxury car, a kitchen renovation. Stayed out of the way. The one place I never felt like a ghost was at my grandfather's granary farm. It's this old place about an hour out of town. A sprawling property with a white clapboard house, a red barn, that's leaning a little and acres of fields that go golden in the fall to the rest of my family. It was just a piece of real estate, a weekend obligation. They'd go for holidays. But they'd spend the whole time on their phones, complaining about the Wi-Fi, talking about how much work the place needed, how it was a drain on resources. But to me, it was everything. Grandpa saw that he was a quiet man too. He didn't say much. But when he did, you listened. And I would just sit on the porch for hours watching the light change over the fields. He taught me the names of the trees. He showed me how the land lay, where the creek ran after rain, which part of the pasture got the best sun in the morning. He never talked over me. He'd ask me a question, and then he'd really wait for my answer. He was the only one who ever made me feel solid. When he passed away last year, a part of me felt like it had been sealed up in that old house waiting. The family's attitude towards the farm became immediately practical. It was an asset, a problem to be solved. The conversations started almost before the funeral. Flowers had wilted. We need to sell it. The taxes are a burden. Who wants to deal with maintaining it? It was a given, a foregone conclusion. My father and brother started talking to realtors. My sister began brainstorming about how we'd split the money, a vacation fund maybe, or investments. I'd sit there listening, my heart aching. But when I tried to speak, to even suggest that maybe we didn't have to sell it, that maybe it meant something more, the words just dissolved in the air. Sweetheart, be realistic, my dad would say. It's a money pit. And the conversation would move on. I felt like I was watching them plan the demolition of my own soul. A few months after Grandpa died, my grandmother asked me to help her go through some of his things in the study at the farmhouse. She was having a hard time with it, and she knew I was gentle with his memory. The study smelled like old books and pipe tobacco, a scent that was purely him. It was a peaceful, sad afternoon. We were sorting through ledgers and old photographs. And then in the bottom drawer of his heavy oak desk, underneath a stack of old farm supply receipts, I found a large, stiff envelope. It was faded with age. My name was on it, just my name, written in his familiar, steady handwriting. My hands trembled a little as I opened it. Inside was a letter. Not really, it was a document, a thick, legal-looking document, with seals and stamps. The title at the top was Quitclaim Deed. I didn't understand all the language at first. There was a lot of whereas and party of the first part. But as I read slowly, carefully, the meaning began to crystallize. It was a deed for Granary Farm, dated just a year before he died. It transferred ownership of the entire property, the house, the barn, all one. My sister leaned forward. It's what Grandma would have wanted for the family to benefit. The word family hung in the air, toxic and meaningless. 120 acres from my grandfather's name to mine. It was a secret he'd never told anyone, not my grandmother, not my parents, no one. He had quietly, legally given it all to me. The reason was stated plainly in his own words, added to the standard form. It said, for the one who sees this land not as dirt, but as a legacy, for the one who listens to its quiet song. I sat on the floor of that study, the paper in my lap, and I cried. They weren't tears of sadness, or even of joy. They were tears of being seen, after a lifetime of being looked through, of being an afterthought. This man, this quiet man like me, had looked right at me. He had seen my value, when my own parents, my own siblings, could not. He had trusted me with the thing he loved most in the world. I folded the document back into the envelope, and I held it against my chest. I knew in that moment that everything was about to change. But I wasn't ready, yet I needed to sit with this. I needed to let the power of it settle in my bones. So I said nothing. I went home, I put the deed in a safe deposit box, and I watched the family machine churned on. The realtor was selected. A listing price was agreed upon. Offers started to come, and they were so excited, gathered around the kitchen table, talking about the numbers. They didn't even notice that I wasn't contributing. They just assumed I was going along with it, as I always did, the invisible, agreeable member. The day they accepted an offer was the day I knew I had to act. They were all there celebrating with a bottle of wine. It's a great price, my brother said, clapping my father on the back. Well, be closing in 60 days, clean and simple. I took a slow breath. This was it. It's not going to be that simple, I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. The room didn't exactly go silent. It was more like my words created a bubble of confusion within the noise. My sister laughed. What do you mean the buyers are fantastic, it's a done deal? No, I said a little louder this time. It's not you can't sell what you don't own. That got my father's attention. He put his wine glass down. What are you talking about? We own it, it's the family farm. I looked at their faces. I saw no apology, no remorse, no acknowledgement of the years of silence. I saw only impatience, I saw entitlement. They felt they deserved this money. And I was the inconvenient obstacle standing in their way, my desire for a connection ward with the sharp clear pain of their neglect. The hope id clung to began to curdle into something else, something solid. The family doesn't own it, I said, and I felt a strange calm spread through me. I do. The laughter that followed was nervous, dismissive. Don't be ridiculous, my mother said. How could you own it? That's when I told them about the afternoon, in the study, about the envelope with my name. I didn't show them the deed. Not then, I just described it. I told them about the quitclaim deed, and what it meant that Grandpa had transferred the title to me and me alone over a year ago. The change in the room was physical. The celebratory atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a thick, disbelieving tension. My brother's face went from confused to angry. That's impossible, he would have told us. There would have been paperwork, taxes. You're mistaken. I'm not mistaken, I said. The title company will discover it. They always do a search. The sale cannot go through without my signature, my permission. The chaos erupted then. It was like I had pulled a single crucial gear out of the family machine, and the whole thing was grinding to a halt, screeching and sparking. My father started demanding details. His face red. My sister was frantically Googling quitclaim deed validity on her phone. My mother just looked stunned, repeating, "Why would he do that? Why wouldn't he tell me?" My brother started talking about contesting it, about claiming undue influence. The noise was overwhelming. But for the first time I was at the center of it. They were all shouting, but they were shouting at me. They were finally seeing me. In the days that followed, the frantic attempts to contact me began, not the gentle occasional texts. I was used to my phone buzzed constantly, calls, messages. "We need to talk about this. This is a misunderstanding. You need to sign the papers." They came to my apartment. They tried to reason, to pressure, to guilt trip. "Think of the family," my father said. "Think of what we could do with that money." It was the same old song, their needs, their plans. My role was to fall in line. But I held my ground. The quiet observation of a lifetime had given me a strength they never anticipated. I had seen all their moves. I knew all their arguments. I wasn't swayed by the anger or the panic. I had finally found my voice, and it was steadier than I ever imagined it could be. I agreed to a family meeting, not at our loud familiar house, but at the farm on the porch, where Grandpa and I used to sit. They all arrived, faces set in various expressions of frustration and anxiety. They expected a fight. They expected me to dig in my heels, to be difficult. I took a breath. "Before we talk about signatures," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I think we need to talk about the last 5 years." But I had a different plan. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I wasn't doing it to be cruel. I was doing it to be heard, truly heard, for the first time. I waited for them to settle. I looked at each of them in turn. I am not going to block the sale out of spite. I began. Their postures relaxed slightly, a flicker of hope in their eyes. They thought I was capitulating. Then I continued, "But I am not going to just sign the papers either, not until we have a real conversation, a conversation where everyone sits down and everyone listens, not just the loudest voices." I laid out my terms. We would talk about the farm, what it meant, not just its monetary value, but its value as our history, as Grandpa's legacy. We would talk about why he might have done this, and we would talk about the way this family operates, the way decisions are made, the way some people are consistently left out. The meeting that followed was the most difficult and the most honest of our lives. At first it was just defensiveness. "We never meant to ignore you," my mother said, tears in her eyes. "You're just so quiet. We assumed you were fine." "Being quiet doesn't mean I have nothing to say," I replied. "It just means I need a little more space to say it." Slowly, painfully, the conversation unfolded. I told them how it felt to be constantly talked over. I gave them examples, moments they had long forgotten, but were etched into my memory, and they started to listen, really listen. My brother admitted that he always just assumed he knew what was best. My father, with a great sigh, acknowledged that he carried his own father's domineering style without ever questioning it. It wasn't about blame anymore, it was about understanding. We talked for hours about the farm. I shared my vision for it, that it didn't have to be sold off to strangers, that maybe it could be kept in the family, become a place for all of us, a true family home. They heard ideas from me that they had never considered because they had never stopped to ask. In the end, we didn't sell, we decided together to keep it. I used my ownership not as a weapon, but as a key. It unlocked a door that had been shut for decades. It forced a reckoning. Now, when we have family meetings, there is a chair for me, and there is silence sometimes while I gather my thoughts and they wait. The power didn't come from the deed itself. The paper was just a symbol. The real power came from the patience I learned in the shadows, from the clarity that comes from watching and waiting. It came from the love of a quiet man who saw the strength in silence. They finally had to listen, not because I was shouting, but because I held the truth, and the truth, it turns out, can be the quietest sound of all, until it's the only one left in the room. The room went cold. My mother looked away. David's jaw tightened. Now is not the time for that, he said dismissively. This is a business matter. Is it? I asked, because, from where I am sitting, it seems like the only time you've considered me family, in half a decade, is when you need something from me. You can't ignore my existence, and then demand my participation. That's when the masks came off. Sarah scoffed. Oh, don't be so dramatic. You're the one who left. You're the one who chose to be different. We're offering you a small fortune to do nothing but sign a piece of paper. This is more money than you'll make in 10 years of teaching. And what about everything else? I asked, the anger finally rising hot. And clean the birthdays, the Christmases, the phone calls that went unanswered. Does a signature on this document erase all of that? Does it mean I get an invitation to Thanksgiving this year? David slammed his hand on the table. This is exactly why you were always so difficult. You're ungrateful. You have a chance to do the right thing for this family, and you're trying to make it about your hurt feelings. And there it was, the truth. My feelings were an irrelevant annoyance, a distraction from the business at hand. Their greed was laid bare, naked and ugly in that moment. The internal conflict vanished. The war was over. The pain of neglect was trumped by a fierce protective clarity. No, I'd call, I'd send gifts for my nieces and nephews. The calls would go to voicemail. The gifts were never acknowledged. It was like throwing stones into a deep, dark well. You never hear them hit the bottom. You just stand there in the silence, wondering if you even threw anything at all. I looked at each of them, my mother silent and complicit, my sister greedy and dismissive, my brother angry and entitled. I saw them not as my family, but as three people who saw me as a tool. I stood up. I pushed the packet of papers back across the table. No, I said. The word was simple, final. The reaction was instant, a torrent of anger. They called me selfish, a fool, spiteful. They said I was throwing away my future. They said I would regret this. They tried guilt. They tried threats. But their words just washed over me. They had no power anymore. Their anger was just noise, confirming the absolute rightness of my decision. I turned and I walked out of that house. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it quietly. The warmth of the sun on my face felt like a baptism. The aftermath was peaceful. There were letters from their lawyer, of course, official-looking documents. I hired my own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman, who handled everything. I didn't sell. I refused to sign. The property by law remained, as it was, with my name on it. I knew it was a stalemate. They couldn't get the money without me. And I had no intention of giving them what they wanted. It wasn't about the money for me. It was about the principle. It was about reclaiming my power. The final peaceful realization settled deep within me. Family isn't just a biological accident. It's a choice. It's the people who show up for you, who respect you, who love you for who you are, not for what you can do for them. The family I had mourned for so long was an illusion. Letting go of that illusion was the real inheritance. I am free now, free from the weight of their expectations, free from the hope for their approval. I built a chosen family of friends who are loyal and true. I embraced my life, my quiet, authentic life. Completely. The toxicity of their conditional love is gone. My self-worth is not tied to their acceptance. My message to anyone listening is this: you cannot allow yourself to be used. Your value is not negotiable. If someone only recognizes your existence when they need a signature, then the greatest power you have is to pick up the pen and choose to write your own name on a different story, altogether a story where you are the hero, not the footnote. The quiet here is a physical thing. It has weight and texture. It's the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant chirp of a bird, Outside the window the gentle rhythm of my own, breathing it's the sound of a life I built piece by fragile piece. After I walked away from all the noise I live in a small house at the edge of town. The walls are painted colors. I chose myself warm and calming there are books on the shelves that no one complains about, and plants on the sill that I remember to water it's not a dramatic. The emotional toll, it's a subtle erosion you start to question your own reality. Was I the difficult one? Was my choice really so terrible that it warranted this complete and total erasure? The loneliness wasn't about being physically alone. I had friends, a partner, it was this specific sharp loneliness of being orphaned by people who were still very much alive. It was knowing that a fundamental tie, the one that's supposed to be unconditional, had been severed, because I preferred a canvas to a conference room. Life not a loud one, it's a peaceful one, and that's everything. My chosen family, the people who actually see me there, here too, my partner Lena, whose laugh is my favorite sound, our friends who come over for dinner and talk about real things, not just surface-level pleasantries. We have a dog, a lazy old greyhound, who spends most of his day asleep on the couch. This life, this quiet, simple life, is my masterpiece. It's the proof that I could heal, that the person they ignored and dismissed for so long could actually build something beautiful from the scraps they left behind. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was chopping vegetables for dinner, sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. Lena was still at work. The ringtone was so ordinary, so mundane. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up without looking. The voice on the other end was my Aunt Carol. I hadn't heard that voice in 5 years, not since the last family gathering where I'd sat in silence, while they all talked around me as if I were a piece of furniture. Her voice was strained tight with a panic that felt both performative and genuine. She didn't say hello, she just launched into it. "We've been trying to reach you, it's your brother David, he's sick, very sick." She said it like an accusation, as if my not being on standby for a family emergency was a personal failure. My hand tightened on the counter. "David, my older brother, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong while I could do no right." She explained it in a rush of medical jargon. Aplastic anemia. His bone marrow has stopped working. He needs a transplant. They tested the family. I was the only match, a perfect match. The words hung in the quiet kitchen, so heavy they seemed to dent the air. "You need to come," she said. And it wasn't a request, it was a demand. "You need to come to the hospital and sign the papers. They need to do the harvest. It's the only chance he has." And then came the emotional scaffolding, the framework of guilt she built around this demand. "He's your brother," she said, as if those 3 words were a complete and unassailable argument. Blood is blood. You can't turn your back on family. Think about what your mother is going through. How could you be so selfish after all she's done for you? That one stung. What had she done for me? Mostly shed. Done a masterful job of pretending I wasn't there, of favoring David in 1,000 tiny soul-crushing ways. There was no "how have you been?" no "I am sorry." We lost touch, no acknowledgement of the 5 years of silence, the birthdays and holidays that passed without a card or a call. The silence from them had been a roaring void. And now they were breaking it only to ask for a piece of my body. They saw me not as a person, but as a resource, a spare part they had in storage. The audacity of it was breathtaking. After I hung up, the kitchen was no longer quiet, it was deafening. The hum of the fridge was a screech. The weight of the silence was now the weight of a life, my brother's life. I stood there, my hands shaking, staring at the half-chopped carrots on the cutting board. The simplicity of my life felt like a lie. It had been a beautiful illusion. And this phone call was the pinprick that was making the whole thing deflate. The moral quandary wasn't abstract, it was a war inside my head, a screaming match between 2 versions of myself. One version was the human being, the one who felt a primitive instinctual pull to help another person in mortal danger. That part of me imagined David in a hospital bed, pale and weak. I remembered him as a boy teaching me how to ride a bike before all the resentment and competition set in. That version of me whispered that this was a chance to be the bigger person, to transcend the built a life without them, a good life. But there was always this shadow, this faint echo of that silence. Past to save a life, how could I live with myself if he died, and I had the power to stop it? But the other version, the one that had built this quiet life brick by brick, was furious. It screamed about justice. It reminded me of every snide comment, every discarded invitation. Every time I was made to feel less than. David wasn't just a bystander in that neglect. He was a primary instigator. He reveled in his status, He never defended me, never reached out. His silence for 5 years was a conscious choice. Why should my body be the redemption arc for his story? Why should I have to undergo a painful invasive procedure for people who wouldn't have given me the time of day? If I were the one dying, this wasn't about saving a life in the abstract, it was about saving his life. And a part of me, a dark, wounded part, wondered if the world wouldn't be a slightly better place without his particular brand of cruelty in it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Lena, who held my hand, but knew better than to try and tell me what to do. She just listened. In the morning, I called my therapist. I laid it all out, the cold, hard facts, alongside the swirling hot emotions. She didn't give me an answer, she just asked questions. What would this act mean for you emotionally? Not for them. But for you, would it be an act of healing? Or an act of self-betrayal? Can you separate the medical procedure from the family dynamic? The questions were a lifeline, but they also made the water even murkier. There was no right answer, there was only a choice. And then a lifetime of living with the echoes of that choice. I realized I was afraid of the guilt. Either way, if I said no, and he died, would I be haunted by it? Forever? Would I become the monster they always faintly implied I was? But if I said yes, if I gave them what they wanted, would I be consumed by a different kind of guilt? The guilt of betraying myself, of allowing them to use me, of validating their belief that my only value was in what I could provide for them. It was a trap, a perfectly designed, inescapable trap. I made the decision on a Thursday. I drove to the hospital myself. I didn't tell them I was coming. I walked through the automatic doors, the smell of antiseptic filling my nose, and found the waiting room they'd described. And there they were, my mother, my Aunt Carol, a few others. They looked up when I entered. And for a second, there was a flicker of something in my mother's eyes. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't relief at seeing me, it was assessment. It was the look you give a delivery driver who's finally arrived with a package you need. I didn't sit down. I stood in front of them. My mother spoke first. You're here, good. The doctors are waiting. We need to get the preliminary tests started right away. No hello. No thank you, just straight to business. I took a slow breath. I looked her directly in the eye, something I hadn't been able to do since I was a teenager. I'm not here to donate, I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. I came to tell you in person that my answer is no. Then the phone rang. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was grading papers. I saw the area code on the caller ID, and my stomach just dropped. It was my brother's number. My heart started pounding, a frantic, nervous rhythm. Why, after almost 5 years of absolute silence, why now? I almost didn't answer. But that tiny, stupid flicker of hope. You know, the one, the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had had a change of heart, that a health scare or a moment of clarity had made them see how foolish this all was. The silence that followed was different from the quiet in my kitchen. This was a cold, hostile silence. My Aunt Carol gasped. My mother's face hardened into a mask of pure contempt. No. She said the word, a sharp, brittle thing. What do you mean, no? This is your brother. You would let him die. And then it all came out, the real reasons, the motivations I had suspected, but hadn't wanted to fully believe. After everything we've done for you, my mother spat. This is the thanks we get you. We're always selfish. Always so difficult. I knew we couldn't count on you. I told them you wouldn't have the decency. There was no appeal to my better nature anymore, no pretense of family bond. It was just rage, that their resource was refusing to be harvested. Their reaction didn't make me doubt my decision, it confirmed it. It cemented it. They didn't want me back, they wanted my bone marrow. I turned and I walked away. I walked out of the waiting room, down the hall, through the automatic doors. I got into my car, and I drove back to my quiet house. Lena was waiting for me. She didn't ask what happened, she just opened her arms. And I walked into them. The closure wasn't pretty. It wasn't a neat, tied-up ending. It was messy and painful, but it was final. I thought forgiveness was about letting go of anger for someone else's sake. Now I understand it's about letting go for your own. I may never forgive them for what they were right up to the very end. But I have forgiven myself for choosing my own peace. Protecting yourself isn't cowardice. It's the most profound act of courage there is. My body is my own, my peace is my own. And some things, even a life, are not worth the price of sacrificing either. The house I grew up in was built on paperwork. The air always smelled faintly of ink and coffee. Dinner table conversations weren't about school or sports, they were about market fluctuations, supply chain logistics, and quarterly reports. My father's study was the real heart of the home, a sacred space where blueprints for buildings and blueprints for our futures were drafted simultaneously. The business, a commercial construction firm, Was the third parent the favorite child, and the family religion all rolled into one. It was called Ellis Sons, and I, Michael Ellis, was the eldest son. My earliest memories are of tracing the embossed logo on my father's stationery, feeling the weight of that name, that expectation. I wasn't just expected to join the company I was groomed for. Its summers were spent not at camp, but on construction sites, handing tools to the foreman, learning the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition wall. Before I learned algebra, by the time I was 25, I was a project manager. I didn't get the title because of my last name. I earned it by working twice as hard as anyone else, desperate to prove I belonged there on my own merit. I loved the smell of sawdust and fresh concrete. I loved the tangible progress of seeing a structure rise from an empty lot. It wasn't just a business to me. It was a legacy. It was my life's work, my identity. The fracture happened over the Northridge project. It was a big one, a multi-use complex that would define the company for a decade. I saw a flaw in the foundational design, a potential weakness that the lead architect, a close friend of my father's, had overlooked. I raised my concerns in a meeting. I had data reports. It even consulted an independent engineer. My father saw it as a personal insult, a challenge to his authority and his judgment in hiring the architect, my younger brother David, who had. So I answered, hello. My voice sounded thin, strange to my own ears. Always been more politician than builder. Sided with Dad. He called my concerns alarmist and divisive. The argument escalated behind closed doors, voices echoing from the office I'd once viewed as a throne room. They called me reckless, arrogant. They said I was trying to undermine the company to make a power play. I was stripped of my responsibilities on Northridge, ostracized. My emails went unanswered. My suggestions were dismissed in meetings with a wave of a hand. The final blow came on a Monday morning. My keycard didn't work. Security escorted me to my father's office, where he and David sat grim-faced. There was no discussion. They offered me a severance package and told me it was best for the company if I pursued other opportunities. I was an Ellis, but I was no longer part of Ellis Sons. The family business had excommunicated its heir. The exile was brutal. The first year was a blur of bitterness, and resumes sent into a void. The construction world in the city is a small one, and the story of my ousting had preceded me. The Ellis name, which had once opened doors, now slammed them shut. Whispers followed me. Troublemaker, ungrateful. I had to move to another state, change my entire career path. I went into commercial real estate development, starting from the absolute bottom. It was a different kind of building, more about numbers and leases than steel and glass. But I found my footing. The relentless work ethic my father had instilled in me was the one thing they couldn't take away. I built my own small, respectable firm. From nothing. It was grueling, lonely work, but it was mine. I'd occasionally check in on Ellis Sons from a distance. I saw the news about the Northridge project 6 months after my departure. The exact flaw it identified caused a 12-month delay and tens of millions in cost overruns. There was a quiet satisfaction in being right, but it was a hollow, bitter victory. It was proof that I hadn't been the problem. But the proof arrived too late to change anything. The company never fully recovered its reputation. I watched it stagnate, become a ghost of the ambitious enterprise I'd once loved. 15 years passed. I'd built a good life, a quiet life separate from the noise of my family. The anger had cooled into a permanent low-grade ache. Then the email arrived. It was from David. The subject line was simply family. The message was polite, carefully neutral. He hoped I was well. He said it was time to reconnect, that there were important family matters to discuss. He suggested a lunch at a high-end steakhouse downtown, a place my father had always favored for closing big deals. I knew with a cold certainty that this was not about family. This was business. I felt a familiar old tension coiling in my stomach, but this time it was mixed with a cold, clear curiosity. What could they possibly want from me now? I arrived exactly on time. They were already seated in a secluded leather booth. My father and David, they looked older, grayer. The years had not been kind to the company, and it showed on their faces. The greetings were stiff, a pantomime of warmth. We exchanged pleasantries about the weather, the city. The waiter took our drink orders. Then, as the menus were set down, my father got straight to the point. No apology, no acknowledgement of the past 15 years. He just laid it out like a contract clause. Hey, it's David. His voice was the same, confident, a little rushed, like he was always on his way to a more important meeting. There was no long time no see, no how have you been? He launched into this bizarrely normal monologue. He talked about the weather back home, his kids' soccer team, some minor drama with his neighbor's fence. It was like the last 5 years had never happened. I just listened, stunned, my hand gripping the phone too tight. This performance of normalcy was more unsettling than the silence had been it. It was about the sale. A massive conglomerate was looking to acquire a portfolio of regional construction firms, and Ellis Sons was a target. It was a lifeline, a golden parachute for them. But there was a problem, a legal snag. When the company was incorporated, my grandfather had set up a unique share structure. My father, in a moment of paternal pride, when I first became a project manager, had transferred a small non-voting shareholding to me. It was a symbolic gesture, a way of making me feel invested. I'd forgotten about it entirely, but now this share, this tiny forgotten piece of paper, was a poison pill. The acquiring company's lawyers had discovered that, for the sale to proceed, every single shareholder, no matter how minor, had to sign off. They needed my signature. David leaned forward, his voice a practiced mix of reason and condescension. He talked about the future, the legacy, how this sale would secure the family's name in the industry. He said this was a chance for me to be part of it, to do the right thing for the family. Then he slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was an agreement. In exchange for my signature, they would grant me a one-time payment of 1% of the sale price. It was a pittance, an insult, disguised as an offer. It was a transaction. Pure and simple. They weren't asking for my forgiveness, they were trying to buy my compliance. My father finally spoke, his eyes avoiding mine. It's a good deal, Michael, don't be difficult. In that moment, every shred of lingering hope for a real reconciliation evaporated. The last 15 years of silence, of being erased from the family photo, crystallized into this single transactional moment. The anger didn't roar, it turned to ice. I looked at them not as my father and brother, but as two executives who had made a critical error in their business plan, and I decided to treat them as such. I picked up the paper, read it slowly. I let the silence stretch the way you do in a negotiation to unsettle the other party. I finally put it down. I looked at my father. This isn't a negotiation, I said, my voice perfectly even. You've presented me with a problem. I am now going to present you with the solution. I told them I was aware of the Northridge settlement, the company's current debt ratio, the precise valuation the conglomerate had likely offered. I saw the shock on their faces. They thought I was an outsider. I had never stopped being an insider. I'd just been observing from a different angle. I told them the 1% was unacceptable. I told them that my signature was the key to their golden parachute, and that key had a real market value. I said my terms were simple: a full, fair buyout of my share, based on the actual sale price, not a token gesture, not 1%, but the proportional value it represented, plus a premium for the obstruction it was causing. And secondly, a signed, notarized statement from both of them, acknowledging that my removal from the company was a strategic error based on their personal grievances, not my professional performance. I wasn't asking for an apology, I was demanding a factual correction for the record. The color drained from my father's face. David started to bluster, to talk about family loyalty. I cut him off. This stopped being about family. I said, the moment my keycard stopped working, you made it a business decision. Then I am simply honoring that precedent. I stood up. I told them I had the name of my lawyer at the top of the document. I'd brought with me my own version of the agreement. I said they could have their lawyers contact him. The ball was in their court. The meeting was over. Was dishonest. I walked out of the restaurant. The afternoon sun was bright. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. I felt clear for the first time in 15 years. I had faced them from a position of strength, not hurt. I had drawn a boundary, not as a wounded son, but as a professional who understood his own worth. They called my lawyer the next day. We negotiated for a week. I got my fair buyout. I got my signed acknowledgement. I signed their papers. And in doing so, I didn't just approve the sale of a company, I finalized my own emancipation. I closed the book on Ellis Sons. The empowerment wasn't in the money, it was in the act of looking my own history in the eye and refusing to flinch. It was in treating their betrayal with the cold professional respect it deserved, and in doing so finally setting myself free from it. The decision to find you all, it didn't come lightly. I had a good family, a loving family, the only one I'd ever really known, my mom and dad, the ones who changed my diapers and taught me to ride a bike and held me when I had nightmares. They were my whole world. But there was always this quiet hum in the back of my mind, a question mark. Where did I come from? Who did I look like? Was there someone out there with my eyes or my laugh? It took years to work up the courage I had to be sure I was doing it for the right reasons, that I wasn't betraying the parents who raised me. They were the ones who supported me, who helped me gather the documents, who told me they'd love me, no matter what I found. So I started the search. It felt like an archaeological dig into my own life, piecing together fragments of information from old records, following digital breadcrumbs. There was this nervous hope, this fantasy, that maybe there was another whole family out there waiting for me, that I'd have brothers and sisters, and a biological mom who'd thought about me every single day. And then I found you. Your social media profiles were right there, pictures of a family. I could have belonged to family reunions, in parks, holiday dinners, graduation photos. I saw my own nose on someone else's face. I saw my hair color. It was surreal. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely type the message. I must have rewritten it 100 times. I wanted to be gentle, non-threatening. I just said who I was, that I believed I might be related, and that I hoped we could talk if they were comfortable. Sent it, and then I just stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my ears. The reply didn't come for weeks, and when it did, it was from you, my biological mother. It was so clinical. You confirmed the facts. Yes, you'd given birth to me. Yes, the dates matched. But then you said you had a family now, a life you'd built, and that my reappearance was a complication you hadn't anticipated. You said it would be too difficult for your other children, for your husband, who didn't know all the details. You called the past a closed chapter. You wished me well, you really did. But you asked me politely and firmly not to contact any of you again. I read that message in my kitchen, and the room just tilted. It felt like a door I'd spent my whole life walking toward had been slammed shut right in my face. The hope I'd been carrying, that delicate, fragile thing, just shattered. I wasn't a long-lost daughter. I was a complication, a disruption, a reminder of a mistake. I cried for a day. And then I got angry. How dare you have this whole life and act like I was some inconvenient ghost from a past you'd rather forget. I was a person. I was your child.